So that was the first half of our program talking about water supply. Now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about irrigation efficiency. And we have two speakers. Our first speaker will be Dominic Mondy, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association. And let's see if I can get to the right thing here for you. And then just click here, I think, when you're ready.
It's actually the other one.
Nope, did the wrong one. Okay. This one.
There you go.
All right. Glad you know what you're doing. Thanks, Dominic.
Hang on. Okay. Great, thank you. The New Jersey Nursery and Landscape Association, we represent horticultural professionals pretty much in all walks. So nurserymen, nursery growers, landscape professionals, retail garden centers, greenhouse growers, anybody who's growing, selling, or installing plant material. And like with other agricultural practice, either in the home landscape or on a farm, water is obviously essential, and that's why we're talking about this today. I'll tell you that every year, one of the biggest things that we deal with come late June, July, sometimes August, is drought restrictions. We get panicked phone calls from contractors who've recently installed landscapes and are afraid about plant death, or garden centers or other businesses who may still be allowed to use water themselves but are really concerned with how it's going to affect their customers. And one of the problem with that is it's often a horse is already out of the barn scenario. As we just heard, if there's literally no water in the tank to fight a fire, it's tough to make a case for how am I going to keep my boxwoods alive. So the biggest challenge is education to make sure that we're properly conserving water in the landscape to hopefully mitigate some of those issues down the line. But it's not just about water conservation when you're talking about landscape health. It's about best practices to ensure plant survival even through those drought periods. And that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about. Bob's going to talk more about turf, and he's got some really great technical tools for turf management. Turf being more of a monoculture can be managed a little bit differently. Landscape plants tend to be a lot more diverse, and really it's some basic best management practices can make a lot of difference. There's really three parts of the landscape development that you could talk about: saving water in the design phase, construction phase, and then the maintenance after that. I talk most about maintenance because that's where we can have the most impact initially, but we certainly need to be designing and installing better landscapes as well to help with water conservation. When you are designing landscapes, think about pardon me, what we have available. Native plants, and not just native exclusively, but drought-resistant plant material is going to be best for our area. Our natural ecosystem is one of wet springs, and while the climate may be shifting a little bit, traditionally wetter springs, wetter falls, and drier summers. So you want to work with plant material that's adapted to those sort of conditions. Try and group plants when you're designing them by like water requirements. If you are planting some specimen plants or some more exotic plant material for a specific reason, try and get that stuff together so you can maximize water where you need it and limit it in other parts of the landscapes. And grass is important, and grass is fun, and grass is where the kids play and everything else, and grass looks great as a nice front lawn, but let's be practical about the size of turf areas. Oftentimes a landscape bed may require a little bit more water in initial establishment, but will require a lot less water over a period of time, a lot less regular watering, and if we can limit the size of turf areas where we don't necessarily need to have the turf, we can manage water better as well. Think about ground covers in landscape beds, areas where you have big mulch areas in between plants, or if you have large trees on a property with big mulch rings around them, getting some ground cover in there will help use more water, cool the soil, and prevent a little bit less water from being lost as well from runoff. And of course, we have one of New Jersey's rain garden experts in Bill Sharapa here, bioswales, rain gardens, designing water reclamation and conservation garden spaces into the landscape can be essential. And I think more and more as education and outreach happens, the average homeowner is becoming aware of this and may even be requesting it. Make sure you grab these excellent handouts, these cooperative extension fact sheets that are out front that explain how to do that. And like I said, you have a great resource here in Monmouth County. This is a picture of a bioswale at Swarthmore College, the Scott Arboretum. And it's basically just like you would have an above ground swale. It absorbs more water, it slows the flow of water across the landscape. That allows more water to percolate down into the soil. Another technique when you're laying out landscapes is xeriscaping. First popularized in the West, where well, it became almost essential in some areas. Basically, it's designing plants that once they're established have very, very low water requirements. Ornamental grasses, certain types of perennials can be really, really attractive and functional in that regard. When you're building projects, and for the landscape contractor, maybe you're designing your own work, maybe you have a design team, but oftentimes you're following homeowner direction or getting a plan provided by another designer or landscape architect or something like that. A good installation technique can actually make a huge difference in plant health and the long-term water requirements of plants. Not planting too deep, for example, where plants are going to get stressed and die. For the average homeowner, when they see their plants are getting a little stressed, what's the first thing they do? They put more water on it. So that's not always the case, and that's not always the problem, but that's their knee-jerk reaction, and there's a good example of straight-up water loss. It's not providing any benefit to the plant. Proper planting techniques will help the plants be healthier, and when the healthy plant needs less water once it's established. Make sure your soil conditions are appropriate. You want to make sure that you have enough organic matter or the right sort of soil texture where the water that's being put into the ground is being held and is made available to the plant. Obviously, soil compaction, if you're working on a new construction site and there's soil compaction, that's a big problem because you're more likely to have more runoff and less percolation. And look at your existing plant material. If there's stuff that's already established and healthy and it can be worked and incorporated into your landscape, you're better off using that material than cutting it down, chopping it down, ripping it out, and replacing new stuff with new stuff that's going to have a higher water requirement. For a lot of you who are maintaining landscapes that are already in place, you have what you have, and certainly there's some things that can be done to help conserve water in any type of existing landscape, regardless of how well it's designed or installed. Obviously, number one is watering technique, but mulch and pruning are important as well. For watering, water plants earlier in the day. That's when the plants are going to take up the most water, and also when you're going to lose the least amount of water to evaporation. It's true for turf, but it's even more true for woody plants. You want to water less often. Many times once a week is fine if you're getting water down into the soil so the plant is developing roots down into the soil. Woody plants should have deep root systems so that even during periods of drought, they're tapping into some water that's in that second layer of soil that they have access to, even if the surface might be a little dry. Make sure that the water you're applying is reaching the root zone of the plant. Now, it sounds silly because everybody here understands that plants take up water by their roots, but oftentimes surface or overhead irrigation, if it's a really hot day, lands on the leaves, then lands on the top of the mulch, and depending on how frequently or with what quantity you're watering, a lot of that water just gets evaporated and doesn't actually make it into the plant itself. Think about drip irrigation or other forms of applying water down to the root zone rather than spraying it on the leaves. Don't water too late in the evening or in the middle of the night sometimes, where you might have water sitting pooling for a period of time because the plant's not particularly active and the water's not going anywhere. This can create in certain situations cool, damp conditions for certain diseases. And again, if you get with disease and pest management, which is another topic altogether, you still have a problem of showing stress on a plant, which then creates the knee-jerk reaction to water, water, water. And that's probably my final and most important point. Don't overwater landscape plants. Because it's the first thing to do. If someone calls you and says, you planted this, it's not looking very good. Okay, is it watered? They say yes, they say no. They don't know how much they watered. They may have been on vacation for a week and it's a legitimate drought problem, or they may have watered every day and don't know that that's too much. This is an example of a redbud tree. Went out to a landscape, it had died. What was the problem? Did it get enough water? Well, as soon as we pulled the mulch back in some of the soil, it was actually standing in water. It was getting way too much water. And the type of soil was there was a heavy clay soil. It was holding that water. You see, we had drip irrigation. It was a good setup. There was just way too much water for the other plants around it were doing okay. And the redbud tree had literally drowned. In the middle of the summer, had drowned right in its spot. So be careful not to overwater plants. Stick a shovel in the ground in the area. Even put your finger down through the mulch and just make sure that the ground really is dry before you assume the plant needs more water. Mulch is really important. You don't need more than 2 to 3 inches of mulch. I'm hesitant because I don't want people to overcompensate with the mulch volcano, but mulch helps, again, not just conserve water in the soil, but it keeps soil temperatures a little bit cooler in that first layer of soil, and that helps with water loss as well. Again, don't overmulch. Non-organic mulches, a lot of people like stone in their beds, river rock, that sort of thing. It helps. It's not as effective as organic mulch products. And again, consider ground covers in the landscape. This is too much mulch. This creates just as much stress on a plant as not mulching at all or underwatering. Mulch should actually be 2 to 3 inches in a consistent layer and actually taper down and away towards the ground as you get towards the trunk of a tree. And again, instead of wide open mulch areas which get irrigated where you're just kind of irrigating dirt, think about cooling the soil and holding the soil with some ground covers to help design a more effective bed. And then one final note on maintenance. Think about pruning, the type of work you're doing, whether you're clipping hedges or cutting back other types of plants. Landscape plants respond to those stresses with a desire to grow back. And when they do that, they enter a more active phase and they use more water. So think about limiting your heavy pruning work to the spring and the fall, and so that you don't force plants into a situation where they want to push new growth, in which case they're going to want more water. And that's it. Thank you very much.